Jonathan Lane, Executive Director of Revolution 250. He has more than 30 years' experience in public history, tourism, and cultural programming. Revolution 250 is a consortium of more than 70 organizations across the Commonwealth, working together on the commemoration of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. While his employment has led him to many leading institutions, including Plymouth Clock Ducks, the American Antiquarian Society, the Berklee College of Music, and the Massachusetts Historical Society, his historical studies have taken into libraries and archives throughout the U.S. and the United Kingdom. He's been awarded the Massachusetts Office of Travel and Tourism Revolutionary Achievement Award from the Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey in March of 2024, the DAR American 250 Commendation Medal from the Massachusetts Daughter of the American Revolution, the National Sons of the American Revolution, and the 250th Anniversary Gold Medal. He's a member of the Society of the Cincinnati, and he can explain what that means. Only Civil War guys would know that one. Sons of the American Revolution, the Colonial Society of Massachusetts, and the Alden Kindred of America. Now that one I would like an explanation on.
Okay,
Thank
absolutely.
you. Please join me in welcoming John.
All right, so just a couple of things for my introduction. Consortium is a very fancy word that means a group of organizations working together who have no money whatsoever. Society of Cincinnati, we are all descendants of officers who served with General Washington. My particular ancestor is Thomas Cogswell, who starts out his Revolutionary War career as a captain in the Haverhill Militia. Actually, he's here at the Battle of Bunker Hill. And he ends up going through the entire war, ending up as the Wagon Master General, which is a thankless job if anybody ever had one, for General Washington. And then the Alden Kindred, we are all descendants of John Alden and Priscilla Mullins. And we were talking earlier about family history, and I'm descended from actually 3 different Alden children. So my family tree is very much a wreath. Hola, indeed. Thank you everybody for being here today. I'm really excited to talk about the Battle of Bunker Hill. Of course, this is the 250th anniversary year of the Battle of Bunker Hill. Were we in Dartmouth 250 years ago, we would be thinking about the people who were killed and wounded on the 17th of June, 1775. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background into how we got here and what this region is going through. Of course, we're deep into the Siege of Boston, which started on April 19th following the battles of Lexington and Concord. So just to give you a background of the town of Boston in particular, it is a town under siege. Pretty much, you can see here that this is Dorchester Peninsula, this is Boston, this is Bunker Hill, Charlestown. Charlestown is one of the oldest towns in Massachusetts. It was founded even before Boston was founded, and many of the oldest families, including the Mathers, Cotton Mather, Increase Mather, their descendants, and the Fluckers, who are Thomas Flucker is Secretary of the Commonwealth. His daughter would marry Henry Knox. They all live here in Charlestown. And then the siege is essentially all around Boston, essentially coming all the way down into Milton and Dedham, and all the way around up to Chelsea, Malden, and places like that. And even out on the Harbor Islands, there's a lot of military activity going on. And the only entrance into Boston is through this little peninsula, this neck. They call it Roxbury Neck or Boston Neck, depending upon your perspective. It's heavily fortified. Governor Gage, there were ancient fortifications there that go back to the French and Indian Wars, but Gage had reinforced those and actually even added on to them using the British Army to do the work. In 1770, there's about 16,000 people in this town, and half of them are under the age of 16. So it's a really young town. And that's generally true throughout the colonies. About 50% of the population are under the age of 16. Lots of kids, because there was no Netflix.
That'll do it.
Exactly. By the time of the Battle of Bunker Hill, the city of Boston, and it should be the town of Boston, but Boston had lost about half its population. So it's about 8,000 citizens, but there's 4,000 to 6,000 British soldiers who are in town as well. So it's almost one out of every other person you see, or at least one out of every three, is in fact a soldier or sailor in Boston. And the siege lines for Boston, run around about 8 to 10 miles in length. There's a big fort down here in Roxbury that was built by Henry Knox, who will come to Washington's attention. Of course, Cambridge up here on the Charles River, that is the headquarters, that is the center of the line. And then over actually in Medford and places like that, that's the left of the line from the American perspective. The army is headquartered in Isaac Royal's house. Isaac Royal was the largest slaveholder in New England, and he lived in Medford, Massachusetts. His house is still there. It's actually worth going to see. So on the 13th of May, 1775, so this is less than a month after Lexington and Concord, General Gage is warned that the Americans were determined to occupy Charlestown Neck. Now, this is a neck of land. It's only accessible through a narrow strip that connects Charlestown to Cambridge. And there is no Somerville in this period, so it's Cambridge. And there's a very narrow strip of land. And actually, the British had occupied the hills here. They had occupied Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill before. On the night of April 19th, this is where the British soldiers end their day, on April 19th. It's up on this hill. And they're there for a couple of weeks, though they maintain control for a couple of weeks, but eventually all the troops are brought back into Boston. And Gage realizes that anybody with an ounce of military knowledge, and there's actually quite a few in 18th century Massachusetts, but they knew that if you were going to either secure Boston as a place to live, or if you were going to drive the British out of Boston, you needed some of the high ground around the town. So the Massachusetts Provincial Army are already in Roxbury, so they have this high ground here, but they want to take the high ground here and the high ground down in Dorchester as well. So they're determined to take the Charlestown Heights. And what's fascinating is that both General Gage and the Provincial Congress, which is the governing body of Massachusetts at the time, they both have spies very active in this story. And so Gage gets word that the Americans are going to take the Charlestown Heights. The Provincial Congress is warned on the 16th of June that General Gage is going to move soldiers over to the Charlestown Heights, and they're decided to beat him to the punch. Let's see if I can do this here. Okay, I went backwards. So this is a close-up of Boston in 1775. I do have a couple of maps which I've put up on easels at the back of the room, which I encourage you to go look at. And the point of this map in particular is just to show that the British soldiers are housed everywhere. We know, historically that there are soldiers kept on the Common, but we've got soldiers in the Common, we've got soldiers in New Boston, which is today part of the West End, we've got soldiers in the North End, soldiers in the South End, soldiers down at the Neck. They're really spread out, all because officers are living in people's homes anyway, and if you're a member of the Provincial Congress, or if you're sympathetic to their cause and you're not in your house at Boston, chances are your house is going to be either used by the Redcoats or it's going to be torn down and burned for firewood, because firewood begins to get scarce later on in the story. So this is what the fortifications at Boston Neck look like, give you a sense of how hard it might have been for anybody to rush the fortifications or coming out of the fortifications to rush the forts in Roxbury. They're very significant. There's drawbridges, there's moats that they've built watch houses and barracks. There are embrasures for cannons, for firing the land side, firing the ocean side. Montresor, John Montresor, is the chief engineer. He was a very clever, intelligent, hardworking man. A bit of a jerk, but he was, other than that, he was okay. This is Boston Common, famous image from 1768, so a little bit before the time we're talking about. And I just wanted to show this because it does showcase some British soldiers who are encamped here on Boston Common. They're drilling the soldiers here. There's this walk that has been established here with, I'm trying to remember, they're not mulberry trees, but something similar. And then, of course, up here, you have John Hancock's house, which overlooks the entire common. This would become General Howe's headquarters while he's in Boston. There's the beacon on top of which hill? Beacon Hill, that's right. And over here, in one of these houses, is the home of John Singleton Copley, perhaps one of the greatest American painters of this period. He also lived here. And of course, Hancock's house is now where the west wing of the State House is currently. They had an opportunity to save his house in the 19th century, and the Massachusetts legislature, they said, I'd rather have the west wing.
Let's go to Ticonderoga.
You can, yes, there is a copy at Ticonderoga, New York. At least the first floor is really well done. The second floor is a little bit hodgepodge. This is one of the maps I have at the back of the room. This is Charlestown in 1775. Actually, to be honest, the map is actually from the early 19th century, but it's one of the best renditions of what Charlestown would have looked like in 1775, and this is specifically done for a history of the Battle of Bunker Hill. And you can see this is the ancient town of Charlestown. There's about 400 houses that are in Charlestown. Much of the peninsula is given over to agricultural pursuits, or in some cases down here, where it's very wet, and I've actually got a better map to showcase this, there are some brick kilns, so they're digging clay out of what they would have called digging clay out of the bottom, which just sounds very wrong. But they're digging clay and they're making bricks, and they're firing them in giant kilns. And the British soldiers will have to contend with those areas as they march on the day of battle. And you can see the only road leading out of Charlestown, which is still there, by the way, it's still the main drag, goes out to what is now Everett Square and across the peninsula. And there is a causeway. This is a tidal dam causeway that was there in 1775, but it's about 2 people wide. And so if you were going to try and send soldiers across that, it would be very hazardous to their health. Founded in 1629, as I said, and home to many notable peoples. This is Cambridge in 1775. This is the headquarters of the Provincial Army. There's about 16,000 militia troops. The numbers really fluctuated because the men who came to serve, they weren't always tightly tied to their service. If things were slow and they were needed at home for something, they'd just go home and then they'd come back. So this is one of the things that drove Washington nuts. But it's true to form for militia soldiers. They were pretty loosey-goosey in their service. And of course, they elect their own officers. So, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, Captain, I need to run home for a day or two, the captain is your neighbor. And chances are he's going to let you go anyway. So on the 16th of June, 1775, we know that the Provincial Council, which is meeting in Cambridge, they get the intelligence that Gage is going to seize the heights in Charlestown. General Ward, Artemus Ward, who's the commander-in-chief at the moment, orders General Israel Putnam from Connecticut to fortify Charlestown. And what he actually says is a little bit lost in the mist of time. We were told that he's told to fortify Bunker Hill, but part of the confusion derives from the fact that did he really mean Bunker Hill, or did he really mean Breed's Hill, which is a little bit closer? Prescott, who we'll get into in a moment, he decides that actually Breeds Hill is the right choice because that way you're much farther forward and would drive the British crazy. I am somewhat concerned to tell you that General Putnam, who his soldiers called Old Put, is in fact my age. It's a little distressing to learn that if I was in a provincial militia, I might be referred to as Old Lane. Old Lane, he's just, anyway. So at 7:30 p.m., the assembly is called onto Cambridge Common. This is where the soldiers are going to assemble. Of course, this is also where General Washington will take command on the 3rd of July, 1775, so just a few weeks from now, from the 17th. At 7:30 p.m., they hear a prayer from the Reverend Dr. Langdon, who's president of Harvard College. He comes out and he harangues the troops for a while, and they finally start out the march for Bunker Hill. And it's about 1,000 men and a couple of wagon loads of shovels and picks, and they're going to build a redoubt. And a redoubt is essentially an outwork from a fort. It's relatively small. Probably holds up to maybe 1,000 guys, but typically, somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 to 300 to 400 is more usual, and it's going to be earthwork. They're just going to dig for all they're worth, as it were. And I'm going to go back just for a moment. So I told you there's 3 parts, right? So there's Roxbury, that's the American right wing. There's about 9,000 troops there. General Ward is in Cambridge with about 6,000 troops. And John Stark is over in Medford at the hall, at sorry, just having a moment. He's over on the left wing with about 1,300 troops, mostly from New Hampshire. Remember, John Stark is a New Hampshire boy. So let's just go over some terminology so we're all familiar with what we're talking about. So this is the Charlestown Peninsula, town of Charlestown. We've got Breeds Hill here. We've got Bunker Hill over here. This hill is higher than this hill. But this hill is closer to the town, it's closer to British ships, and is a more tempting target. And some people feel that that's why Prescott had the redoubt built here. Up here, this is Morton's Point. This is where the British are going to land initially. And then they're going to do a second landing closer to the town down here. This landing will take place sometime between noon and 2 o'clock. This landing over here will be between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock. And the Americans, they start with 1,000 guys up here, and then they just keep feeding men into the battle. The idea was that these guys, in theory, what was supposed to happen is that these guys were going to dig and build a fort. And then they were going to leave, and the fort was going to be filled with some of the other guys who had been sleeping all night. In reality, that doesn't happen. These guys dig and build a fort, and they defend the fort. And their numbers will dwindle constantly during the day. Furthermore, in addition to this fortification you see right here, there's a long breastwork that is built down the hill. And this was because Prescott felt the fort didn't cover enough ground, which it didn't. So they built a long breastwork down, and then about 150 yards behind this breastwork, from just under the edge of Bunker Hill here, going across, there's a rail fence that is actually a double rail fence that is there. And when Stark and his men from New Hampshire and Knowlton, Major Knowlton from Connecticut, when he comes across, they're all going to reconvene here at the rail fence, and they're going to refortify that. They're going to fill all the rails with straw and hay and rocks and pieces of timber and whatever else they can find. There's actually going to be 2 artillery pieces that are going to be put here, although they won't have much effect. And there's a couple of artillery pieces on the American side up here as well. Again, not used to great effect, or in some cases not used at all. And the British will land a series of artillery pieces when they come ashore here. The artillery pieces are largely ineffectual. Of course, the greatest artillery pieces are out here in the harbor with the ships, and they will actually kill the first man at Bunker Hill, a man named Asa Pollard, who will have his head taken off by a cannonball. And then over in Copp's Hill, which was represented over here, there's a battery with 24-pound cannons. And when I say 24-pound, that's the size of the ball they were throwing. And they would also eventually fire what are called carcasses, which are balls that have been hollowed out and then stuffed with pitch and tar and beeswax and flammable things, so that when they're fired, they catch on fire, and where they land, they catch everything there on fire, which was how the city or the town of Charlestown will be destroyed. So anyway, Breeds Hill, Bunkers Hill, redoubt, breastwork, rail fence, Morton's Point, and we'll take it from there. So let's meet some of our contestants for today. We have Richard Gridley, the supposed father of the civil engineers, or the Corps of Engineers. This is his tombstone. We have, of course, Dr. Joseph Warren, who will lose his life at the Battle of Bunker Hill. He's the political leader of Massachusetts. He's president of the Provincial Congress, but he's also a newly minted Major General. But he gets to Bunker Hill, he's offered command by Prescott, and he says, no, I'm just here as a volunteer. And of course, he will give his life that day. There's quite a few of those stories, by the way. Seth Pomeroy, who's a militia general from Northampton, Massachusetts. He's also on Bunker Hill today, and he's also offered command at various points. He says, no, I'm just a volunteer, I'm just here to fight. And he does not die that day. Of course, we have, let's see, we've got, scroll down here, excuse me. Going to just review my notes here. Gridley, we've got Joseph Warren, we've got Prescott, and Putnam, of course. Israel Putnam, old Put. It's an interesting question about how much Putnam is actually in the battle. We know that he was particularly enamored with the idea of building a redoubt on Bunker Hill, the actual Bunker Hill. So there's some stories that he stayed back, and this was particularly after the war. Henry Dearborn, for whom we get Dearborn, Michigan, he wrote a scathing history of the Battle of Bunker Hill, in which he blames Putnam for just about everything. But Putnam, we do know he did go to the redoubt. He did go to the rail fence several times. We've got Prescott, of course. We've got Colonel Henry Knowlton from Connecticut. He's here. John Stark, of course, from New Hampshire, and Artemus Ward, who is the overall commander, although he doesn't make his appearance on the battlefield at all that day.
Thinking about Shrewsbury.
He is. His house is in Shrewsbury. It's owned by Harvard, and it's a beautiful, beautiful farm. So these are the provincial forces. Now, I just want to say very quickly, these are the people we know who had soldiers on the battlefield. I can't tell you what companies of men or what part of companies of men ended up in the battlefield. We know, for instance, with, so it's almost all of Reed's regiment, Stark's regiment, they're both down at the rail fence. But for instance, Doolittle's regiment, Garish's regiment, Nixon's regiment, we're pretty sure that only portions of those regiments ended up on the battlefield that day. Unlike a modern military, these regiments were often split up and sent to different places. So somebody like Garish's regiment, we know they had troops in Brookline, and they had troops in Chelsea, and they had troops in Cambridge. And as a commanding officer, I think you would find it very hard to coordinate. So exactly which soldiers from which regiments can be difficult to tell. We do have some good records to help us out with that, particularly if regiments are reporting killed and wounded and that kind of thing. You can say, pretty sure that they were there. But this is, so there's the provincial forces here, the redoubt builders, Prescott's Regiment, Bridges Regiment, Colonel James Fry, which by the way, they're trying to save his house up in Haverhill, so if you're interested in that, let me know. Captain Thomas Knowlton, later Major Knowlton from Connecticut. He had the Ashbow brothers in his regiment, the Samuel and John Ashbow, who are Mohican Indians. And Samuel Ashbow was the first indigenous person to give their life, and he dies here at Bunker Hill at the rail fence. Samuel Gridley's two-gun artillery. He would later be court-martialed, of course, because his artillery did not cover itself with glory on this day. And then you can see what the relief was, ordered for 5 p.m. This is a very quick battle. We talk about the Battle of Bunker Hill as starting at 4 in the morning when the redoubt was discovered and they started to be fired upon by the British fleet. But the British soldiers don't actually land until 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The battle really doesn't get going until 3 p.m. And it's all over by 5:30. So, but in that space of time, in that 2.5 hours, the British will lose more men than in any other battle in the American Revolution. And I think that's, just an incredible thing to think about. So Gridley, not Samuel Gridley, but his father, Richard Gridley, will lay out a redoubt approximately 8 rods square with a small redan or a point facing Charlestown. The Americans were heard as they were building, and some people think that they were seen. But no notice was taken of it, and nobody reported anything to General Gage until the discovery at daylight of the redoubt. I have a little note here that says the number of Americans on the Charlestown Peninsula is as hazy as their command structure, and that's really true. I mean, the Massachusetts militia. It operates in a very particular way, as did the Connecticut militia, as did the New Hampshire militia. And fighting under unified command is tricky in this period because New Hampshire troops don't want to take orders from Massachusetts officers, and Massachusetts troops don't want to take command from the guy in the next town because he's not from their town. So there's a lot of chaos that's happening here. But you can see basically the idea was the first reinforcements were supposed to go out and take over the redoubt, and the second reinforcement was to prepare for the assault, and it doesn't quite have. Some of these guys who were part of the second reinforcement didn't actually get onto the battlefield until 5 o'clock, even though they were going to be ordered out at 12. And on the British side, we have, of course, some of our favorites. We've got Lord Percy, who will become the Earl of Northumberland eventually. He, of course, led the relief column with the British marching out on April 19th. He brings out another 1,000 men out of Boston later that morning and really saves the British from complete disaster that day. He's not a fan of the war here in America. He also thinks that anybody who thinks that the Americans were going to be a cakewalk, they should have been disillusioned by April 19th. Fun little fact about him, however, is he's actually although he's known as Hugh Earl Percy, and Percy's by what he went by, his family name is actually Smithson. And it's actually his brother, James Smithson, who gives the donation that allows us to build the Smithsonian Institution. So I love where history comes together like that. We've got, of course, General Gage. He's married to an American. He's been in America large portions of his life, serving in both the French and Indian War. He was with General Washington. Well, he wasn't general at the time, but he was with Colonel Washington when Braddock was overrun in 1755. We've got, let's see, what else we have? Oh, there we go. Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne, yeah, he's down here. I knew I'd do that. Down here. Yeah, this is Montresor here. This is Samuel Graves. He's the admiral commanding the fleet in Boston Harbor. There isn't a nephew he didn't love to promote. So he had a whole bunch of Depot babies in his fleet. And let me just Piggott, yeah, he's all the way on the top right. And Clinton, thank you. It's like having my own
British can tell you who they all are.
British. Exactly.
And don't forget in the other Howe.
And yes, the other Howe, William Howe. The Howes are a really interesting story and deserve your attention if you ever get a chance. There's a wonderful book about their sister, Catherine Howe, who played chess frequently with Ben Franklin. And there was some question about whether this was some sort of little backdoor diplomacy that was going on. Their older brother, George, was killed at the Battle of Fort Ticonderoga during the French and Indian Wars. And the people of Massachusetts actually built a monument to his memory in Westminster Cathedral. You can still go see it today. And it's a really powerful reminder of just how tied we were to the British Empire. And William Howe and his brother Richard Howe, who's an admiral in the British fleet, they both come over to serve in America. Again, not huge fans of the cause from the British perspective, but very dutiful members of the British aristocracy. Let's see. So these are the British land forces. I'm not going to read them all out. If anybody's really interested, let me know. I'll give them to you. But essentially, they had 8 pieces, 12 guns from the British. I don't know why it doesn't add up to 12. That's a really... 4 12-pound, 4 6-pound, and 4 5.5-inch howitzers. So there are 12 guns that they bring over with them. You can see all the naval forces. How effective were the naval forces? As I said, they did kill the first man, but the naval artillery fire was pretty easy to avoid. Clinton, who was General Clinton, he becomes General Clinton, when he's talking about the history of the war in America, he always says that he can do everything better, right? Oh, I could have done that better. And his comment here for Bunker Hill was that he would have deployed the British naval forces closer to the Charlestown Peninsula to prevent reinforcements and escape of British forces and that kind of thing. So the British forces, which in particular they started with, they took all of it. So a British regiment essentially consists of 10 companies. One is a light infantry company. Youngest, lightest, smallest guys, quick, they're specially trained, they fight in pairs. We have the grenadiers, who are the larger, heavier troops, the elite. Those two, the grenadiers and light infantry, are sort of considered the elite part of the regiment. Then you have the rest of the 8 companies are hat companies or battalion companies. So when the British forces are ordered out at the Battle of Bunker Hill, the grenadiers and light infantry are ordered out from all of the regiments, so they're pulling those companies out of their regiment and making them work together, just like they did or didn't do at Lexington and Concord. And then the 5th and the 38th Regiments of Foot were to be ready to embark at 11:30 in the morning, arms, ammunition, blankets, and provisions. And that's what they were carrying. So those great paintings you see of the British Redcoats marching up with their knapsacks on their back never happened. The 52nd, 43rd, 47th, and a battalion of Marines were to embark from the North Battery, so this is in the north end of Boston. Remember, they have to row all these guys over. Fortunately, they commanded the harbor. Pioneers and artillery. The pioneers, of course, the manual laborers. They would have marched to the South Battery under Lieutenant Colonel Cleveland. The artillery did not cover them. The Royal Artillery did not cover themselves in glory at all either. It may have been because, although I don't want to gossip, Lieutenant Colonel Cleveland had a thing going on with the daughter of the head teacher, the head instructor at the Boston Latin School. And there's some discussion that he didn't give it his all because, well, I won't even say it. And Earl Percy, who of course did cover himself in glory on April 19th, he was sent to Boston Neck because Gage's biggest fear was that Bunker Hill was just a diversion and that the Americans were going to come sweeping out of Roxbury and try and take the fortifications. This is actually how Gage portrays the column or the order of battle in his records. So he's got little colored triangles for the different regiments, and he shows you that he's got the artillery, and he's got some light horse that are here. This is all of his troops in Boston. This isn't just everybody who went to Bunker Hill. So this is phase one of the battle. Phase one of the battle starts about 9 o'clock. Prescott asks for reinforcement. At 10 o'clock, the first reinforcement from the Americans marches. Sometime between 12 o'clock and 2 o'clock, the second reinforcement marches. At 2 o'clock, the British begin landing troops, and the British assault begins about 3 o'clock. Now, about this time, as they were landing, one of the things that the British report is that they were being shot at by Americans from buildings inside Charlestown. And the British hate being shot at, period. And so they ordered, General Howe ordered that the town of Charlestown be destroyed. And that's when they start firing carcasses into Charlestown. And it essentially creates this firestorm that destroys 400 houses in Charlestown. And actually the Boston City archaeologist, the city archaeologist of Boston has just had transcribed through volunteer work all of the claims that were posted by people who lost property in Charlestown. And it's really a fascinating look at 18th century material culture in the greater Boston area. Dearborn says, in his history, that the reinforcement was extremely irregular, devoid of everything like concerted effort, each regiment advancing according to his opinions, feelings, or caprice of its commander. And you know what, I'm going to go out on a limb and say he was not wrong sometimes. There's definitely some truth to that. Major McClary, who would die at Bunker Hill late in the day, he's 6'6" from New Hampshire. And he writes, if Massachusetts doesn't need the road just then, would they mind moving over to let the New Hampshire troops through? He was frustrated because the Massachusetts troops would get to the peninsula, they'd see all this firing going on, and they'd go, what do you think we should do? And McClary was just having none of it.
I think some of those floating batteries were firing onto the neck.
Correct. Putnam, there's this great story about Putnam. He wants to save the tools. Putnam is a great quartermaster type general, type leader, and he didn't want to lose any of the entrenching tools. He didn't want to lose the shovels, didn't want to lose the picks. And so he says to Prescott, whose guys are still building, I mean, they're building this redoubt right up to the time the shooting starts. He says, I need you to get some men to bring these picks and shovels back to Bunker Hill where I'm working on my redoubt. And Prescott says, you can't do that. If these men go to take these shovels and picks, none of them are going to come back. He says, these are Massachusetts and Connecticut men. Of course they'll come back. And of course, these men go off with the picks and shovels, never go back. So Howe decides he's going to start the battle. He thinks his best bet is not, of course, not to assault the fortified uphill position. That's a bad idea. So instead he's going to take his elite troops, light infantry mainly, and his grenadiers, he's going to try and go around the end of the American line. So he sends his grenadiers out to face the fence. This is a bit of a diversion. The light infantry are going to run down the beach along the Merrimack River. What did I say?
You said Merrimack.
Oh, excuse me. Yes.
It's in New Hampshire.
Yeah. Sorry, I have Merrimack on the brain for some reason. Anyway, Stark and his men had seen this flaw, and so they had hastily started building a redoubt. And there's that great line, of course, that we all learn in school, don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes, kind of thing. Well, in fact, that quote, by the way, goes back a lot further than Bunker Hill. It goes back at least to the English Civil War. But in this particular case, the true story is perhaps even more interesting. Stark has his men here in the rail fountain. He goes out in front of the lines and he plants a stake about 30 yards out. And he says, do not fire until the redcoats reach that stake. And that is, some steel resolve, considering the redcoats are coming en masse, and they also all have bayonets. However, this works. So the light infantry come running down the beach. Stark and his men have their little, I won't even call it a breastwork, I don't think it got that high, but they fire a volley and wipe out large swaths of the first regiment. And then the second rank of Stark's troops march up to take the lead, and they fire a volley, and they kill large swaths of the guys in the British column. And the third rank of Stark's soldiers step up and again decimate the British forces. And at that point, the British forces decide that they have had enough at this particular point. And so they're going to retire back towards Morton's Hill or Moulton's Hill and sort of reconfigure. And Howe was shocked. Howe was shocked at the decimation by the American forces. And it's one important thing to remember is that the Americans are not firing just musket ball. They're firing musket ball and buckshot. And that probably, I'm not sure the buckshot's going to necessarily kill a lot of people, but it certainly will wound a lot of people. So I love this map. This map is from 1775, and it's meant to show the British assault. And what I love about this is if you can see all of these lines here, that they look like little squares, those are fenced off fields. And that gives you a sense of how many fences the British had to navigate to assault the American positions. It's, whether you stop and climb over the fence or whether you stop to tear the fence down, stopping in the middle of a battle never works out well for you. And it's one of the reasons that I think this map is one of the more important ones, because it reminds us of just how hard the obstacles were for the British to overcome that day. Back to the second phase, Howe's going to try again. He's going to shift everybody to the left a little bit, right? So we're going to forget about the beach. That's a bad idea. Instead we're going to send the light infantry up towards the rail fence, but the grenadiers are going to try and take this middle ground here. Again, they're trying to get behind the redoubt. Remember, the redoubt is facing Charlestown. So the back of the redoubt, which is the evacuation route, should you need one, is the back. So it's really facing the Mystic River. So Howe's going to try a second assault on the diagonal, and he's going to have the same experience. Stark, likewise, sees the route, so he takes a third of his men and he shifts them to the right to cover some of that. There were also, it's not clear on this map, but there were also some small arrow-like fortifications, earthworks, called fletches that are here, and they're meant to give the Americans some cover while protecting against the British assault. This assault didn't go any better for Howe than the first one had. This is a 19th century illustration. I was criticized many, many years ago by a professor who said to me, "Don't you ever use a picture that is not period." This is actually a 19th century engraving but there are no 18th century engravings of this very scene. Of course, remember, Boston is a series of hills, and there are houses on these hills, and people are in fact climbing up onto their roofs to watch the battle. And that's an interesting thing to think about. We forget just how close civil population was to all of this. Charlestown, we talk about the burning of Charlestown, it had largely been evacuated. There were very few people who were living there at that point. I'm not going to say that the people of Massachusetts had these convenient roof hatches to climb out, and so they can see the battles. But they were up on the roofs, and a number of people who watched the battle, including John Burgoyne, who watched it from Copp's Hill, they talk about being able to see the battle going on, and it really was a horrifying experience for them to see. I mean, you've got the entire town of Charlestown on fire, and you've got the British Army marching up in waves back and forth. You've got cannon fire, musket fire, the screams of the wounded and dying. It must have been an amazing sight.
Didn't Abigail and J.Q. Wade watch the battle?
Abigail Adams and John Quincy Adams, they watched the burning of Charlestown from 15 miles away. I mean, there are stories up in the North Shore of being able to hear the sound of the cannons, being able to hear the sounds of the musket fire as far away as 10, 12, 15 miles from various eminences in Essex County. And of course, famously, and actually, if you ever have the opportunity, go to Braintree, find the Abigail Adams Cairn, C-A-I-R-N.
Penn's Hill.
On Penn's Hill, thank you. And if you stand there, you can see the city of Boston. You can imagine, without the skyscrapers there, just being able to watch this tower of flame coming from Charlestown. It must have been an awe-inspiring sight. I throw this picture in all the time whenever I do this because this combines two of my favorite subjects, of course, which is revolutionary history and art theft. So this is a painting that was done for Henry Cabot Lodge's History of the American Revolution, which he was writing, by the way. He's, of course, senior senator from Massachusetts. He was writing his history at the turn of the 20th century while the United States Congress was voting on the first battle of the American Revolution, which is Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Where was he? I just want to ask. Anyway. He contracted with Howard Pyle to do a series of paintings. And this is the one at Bunker Hill. This is one of the more famous images. It shows up in our textbooks everywhere. Stolen out of a museum in Delaware. It's been missing pretty much since the bicentennial. Latest investigations indicate that it may have ended up at a dump in Delaware, which is unfortunate. But it's the image that we all think of, right? When we're talking about the Battle of Bunker Hill. So phase 3, up and over. 4:30 p.m. Howe says, enough of this. Let's just go right at him. So he forms up his men below the redoubt over here. And he's got General Prescott, he's got General Clinton. They've got reinforcements of the 2nd Battalion of Marines, the 47th Regiment. And he says, we're just going to, never mind, don't stop and shoot. That was one of the big changes. Just go straight at them, bayonets, up and over the top. And that's what they did. And that's what worked. The Americans also helped them out a little bit by being out of ammunition. Ammunition is a constant problem for the Americans during the war. Never more so here at the Battle of Bunker Hill, where some of the regiments marched onto the field that day with 9 rounds, which is not going to last long. This is, of course, a more recent painting of the Battle of Bunker Hill done by Don Troiani. We have our hero, Joseph Warren here, ready to fight off the hordes of British soldiers coming up and over the top. We know that the Americans were throwing rocks at this point, swinging clubbed muskets, running for their lives, all of these things. This is, of course, the more famous painting. This is done by John Trumbull, who was at Bunker Hill. That day, he's the son of the governor of Connecticut, and he painted, of course, this painting. He's painted several deaths of Warren. The very first one he painted was a commission from Dr. Joseph Warren's brother, who wanted a painting to remember the scene by. So here we have, Warren falling into the arms of some of his compatriots. We've got Colonel Knowlton in the picture here. We've got Pitcairn, Major Pitcairn of the Marines, the British Marines. He's dying on the field at the same time. And we also begin to have some representations of the Patriots of Color, who we can see in some of his paintings. And it's a good reminder that there are more than 150 Patriots of Color who are fighting at Bunker Hill this day. in 1775. We've got indigenous people from the Mohicans, we've got Wampanoag, we've got Stockbridge Munsee people here. We've also got patriots of color. Prescott's own regiment was highly integrated. Of course, being from largely maritime communities where you'd find people of color living on the margins of society, you'd expect to see that. By law, they're not supposed to be in the Massachusetts militia, but this reflects the reality of what we find in that period. So anyway, to quickly wrap up, British Army, 1,054 killed and wounded. Provincial Army, 450 killed and wounded. For the Provincial Army, the vast majority of them are after the redoubt is stormed. So that evacuation and retreat across the Charlestown Peninsula is definitely hazardous. 30 prisoners of war are taken. Those are almost entirely provincial forces. McClary is actually escapes the battle. He actually gets off the peninsula, and then as dusk is falling, he decides to sneak back onto the peninsula, see if there's anybody else there that he can help escape, and he's killed in the crossfire on the peninsula. I was wondering why I had this. I had this piece earlier in my presentation. I was looking at it this morning. So why is this so early? This is after the battle, right? The British are
You
here.
can see Putnam finished his fort.
Yeah. This is Howe's fort. Yeah. This is where the Americans were. And I remembered why I had this earlier in the presentation. It's because of this. This is wetlands that you can see here. And this is from a map in Lord Percy's personal collection. So this is in England. And it's important to remember how natural, that there are natural features that can affect the movement of an army. And in this case, with the British landing on Moulton's Point, this kind of splashy ground, low-lying, marshy ground that are along this inlet really would have hampered Howe's ability to move his troops from the right to the left. And I think that plays into the experiences that he had that day. Eventually, the vast majority of his troops, he has some guys here who are holding the fence line, but he's shifting everybody over this way. The ground is firmer, easier to move along, excuse me. There's a great story about just before the battle. General Gage is up on one of those housetops we saw that had those great hatches. And he's with a man named Abijah Willard. Abijah Willard is a great old French and Indian War commander from central Massachusetts. He was also a mandamus counselor, which means he was ordered to serve on General Gage's council. And he was surrounded by 2,000 citizens in Sturbridge and forced to resign. They were so outraged. But Willard is in Boston at this time, and his brother-in-law is William Prescott. And he's standing there, and Gage says, here's my telescope. Do you recognize that man up on the redoubt there? He seems to be in command. He says, oh yeah, that's my brother-in-law. And Gage says, will he fight? And Willard supposedly replied, yes, sir, he's an old soldier and will fight as long as a drop of blood remains in his veins. And Gage says, well, the works must be carried. And they did, but at a tremendous cost. So this is a battle that was created for Gage after, this again just shows you the return of the fortifications. So the British are now holding Charlestown Peninsula. They're holding Boston, and really the only peninsula that's left at this point is going to be Dorchester Heights. This is an illustration done by a British soldier after the battle, again showing you how the fences are all torn down and broken. You can see what remains of the American redoubt at the top of the hill. This will become important because there's a map at the back of the room which I put up, and I've used it in the slide presentation. It was done by a man named Henry Pelham. Pelham is John Singleton Copley's stepbrother, or half-brother. And Pelham is over on Bunker Hill the day after the battle. And he's the one who identifies where Dr. Joseph Warren is buried. And so years later, they know where to dig. And they were able to identify Dr. Joseph Warren because Paul Revere had done some dental work, when he wasn't silversmithing and riding around the countryside. He did dental work for Dr. Joseph Warren. He was able to identify him by the dental work he had done. So it was forensic dentistry coming to the fore during the American Revolution. And this is just, I'll end with this is just, I think, one of the most poignant images, again, drawn by a British soldier stationed in Boston in 1775. You see all these sticks that are over here across the river? Those are the chimney stacks, the only thing left from Charlestown. Happy to take any questions. I've stunned them all into silence. Yes, in the back.
How did they determine what times like specific events happened at?
Oh, interesting. So there was no synchronizing watches, at least in the American forces. That was actually introduced during the Revolution by Baron von Steuben. When he came over to train American troops, he introduced them the idea of working together by watch time. And so making sure everybody's watches told the same time. So British officers always had an adjutant or somebody who was taking notes on the battlefield. They had little like pocket bottles of ink that they could use to keep track of the events that were happening. The Americans did something similar, although based on the information, it seems like they did a lot of their remembering rather than making note at the time that it actually happened. Times all over the map. Yes? Yep.
Yeah, okay. I may have missed this. Why did they call it the Battle of Bunker Hill if most of it was fought on Breeds Hill?
Well, that's an excellent question. There is a story going around the national parks these days that Bunkers Hill and Breeds Hill were actually the same hill and everybody just called it one thing or another. I'm not a big fan of that particular story, that particular narrative, because clearly from the maps, and if you ever drive Charlestown, which I don't recommend necessarily, I've done it a lot, but they are distinctly two different hills. And there is a swale or low-lying ground between them. And I think the name comes from the fact that they were ordered to fortify Bunker Hill. They ended up fortifying Breeds Hill, and when they designated the monument in 1824, they were designating the monument to the Battle of Bunker Hill, even though the monument sits on top of Breeds Hill. And that's, it's just that continual confusion over where this actually took place. Of course, Bunker Hill is where Lord Howe would build his fort after the battle, because that protected his army against Cambridge, which everybody wanted to do back then. Yes, sir.
I'm just saying, you talk about the Breeds Hill, just like the fort here.
Yeah.
The names of that.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, it's how history remembers it.
It's true.
Did they move the guns to Dorchester Heights or South Boston?
Oh boy. This is the other. Yeah. So Dorchester Heights is in South Boston today. Back 250 years ago, it was the Dorchester Peninsula. But now it's South Boston. And don't make the mistake of saying, hey, I'm at Dorchester Heights in Dorchester. No, you're not in Dorchester, you're in South Boston. They will make a big deal out of it
They do.
for reasons that surpass understanding. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious. I've walked up Breeds Hill. I mean Breeds Incline, and I don't know how much of that is fill or how much of the hill is gone. Is there still a Bunker Hill?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact,
It's a big church on top.
yeah, there's a huge church on top. And it's, we were hoping to do more archaeological excavations in Charlestown during the 250th because so much of it is untouched. We know where Lord Howe's his fortification was. And that top of that hill, other than having houses and churches on it, has largely remained untouched. And if you've ever done the Bunker Hill Parade, if you haven't been to the Bunker Hill Parade, it's definitely worth your time to go watch, because nobody gets into it like the people at Charlestown. I mean, the two big parades, Charlestown and of course Southie's Evacuation Day / St. Patrick's Day parade, two communities who love a parade. And if you march the parade, you start out near Morton's Point, and you march up to the top of Bunkers Hill, and then you go down Bunkers Hill near Everett Square, you turn left, go down the main drag, and then climb up Breeds Hill. So there's more to Breeds Hill that's there than you'd think. One of our hopes was that they were going to dig the redoubt this year, because they think they know where it was. It's marked, but there's a lot we still don't know. Didn't happen because of the 250th commemoration.
Is it near the monument itself?
The monument sits in the middle of it.
Okay.
Yeah,
But if you wanna go up Bunker Hill, just go up Bunker Hill Avenue,
right.
and it takes you up over the hill, then you go down to
Okay.
the Shrapsville.
Yeah, I've never driven over there, but I have walked up to Bunker Hill.
It's fast. I mean, again, we forget just how much topography plays into all these things. Even the slightest rises, you know, we know that Gage is sending spies out into the countryside, and one of the things he's looking for is where's the high ground, where's the fresh water. This is the information that he needs as a military commander. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Go ahead. Yep. Okay.
No.
Yep.
Wasn't Breeds Hill a poor choice by Prescott because of the possibility, I mean, that there would be naval bombardment, you know?
Again, so you have to remember he's 84 feet above sea level at that point, and the cannons on board the ship can only elevate so much. So there wasn't a whole lot of danger unless you were Asa Pollard from British naval cannon. The earthwork was just about 6 feet. So again, except for poor Andrew McClary, who's 6'6", you know, it covers most of the men who were there. And you're firing, the British are firing, except for what they're firing from Copp's Hill, they're firing solid shot. So it's, you know, balls will bounce and tumble and roll and take out legs and things like that from time to time. But it's a lot harder to hit individuals than you think with a cannon. I mean, I'm not recommending you try that. I'm just saying. Yes.
I know that it doesn't exactly go with Bunker Hill, but did you want to touch a little bit on Henry Knox and some of the ongoing commemoration?
Well, I'll just say that is the next big 250th commemoration, which of course is Henry Knox. Part of the thing, one of the lessons learned here at Bunker Hill, is that the Americans had artillery, and that's a myth, right? We talk about the reason Henry Knox and the training of artillery is important is because the Americans didn't have artillery. The Americans had plenty of artillery. They had the armed ships, they had armed, many of the militia units had artillery pieces, but these are small pieces, 2, 3 pounder, 4 pounder pieces, maybe a 6 pounder if you're lucky. And that's how much the cannonball weighs. But if you're going to drive ships out of a harbor, you better come at them with something more than a 6 pounder. You need 12, 18, 24 pounder cannons. A 24 pounder cannon with a full charge from an elevated position will fire 2 miles. And the Americans didn't have very many of those. So they needed some. And so when Benedict Arnold, give him his due, and Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys, when they captured Fort Ticonderoga, they had cannons galore, mortars for firing high arc shells, and howitzers. That's what Washington needed when he came. So we're excited to tell that story this year. We're working with the state of New York. We're going to be dragging some cannons around the Berkshires, and we'll do some events in Worcester and Cambridge and Framingham and all the towns.
Say, are those events on a website?
www.revolution250.org. It's like having my very own prompters. It's great. I'll be around for a bit, so if you have any further questions, thank you all very much for your time today.